So hello everybody, you're very welcome. It's about 6:05 UK time anyway, so I think we'll make a start. It's fantastic to have you all here for this very exciting launch of three terrific new pamphlets by Clementine E Burnley, Laboni Islam and Fahad Al-Amoudi. My name is Neil Monroe. I'm the director of Oxford Brookes Poetry Centre, where Ignition Press is based. Just a couple of brief technical notes I want to make. If you'd like to offer some enthusiastic words of support for the poets, feel free to do that in the chat. People have already found the chat, that's great. You should be able to find that just at the bottom of your screen. Click on the link, the chat link, and you can type away. In the interest of accessibility, we're going to be sharing the poems as they're being read, and also closed captioning is turned on for anyone who would like to use it. As we share the poems, you'll see that you might want to possibly adjust your view in Zoom to change what you're seeing, and you should be able to do that by clicking on the view button in the top right of your screen. You may also want to adjust the size of the image being shared or the video of the person who's probably going to be on the right hand side of your screen, and you can do that by clicking on the line that separates the shared screen and the speaker's video and dragging it to the left or right to make it bigger or smaller. So if you'd like to do that, please go ahead. The event is being recorded, though it's a webinar, so don't worry, only the speakers are those who are being recorded, so we're not going to spy on you in any way. It will be available, though, the video, in the next few days if you know anybody who couldn't make it along and would have liked to have been here. Or if you just want to relive the excitement again, you can watch the video. I'm just going to say a few words about the press, and then the plan is that each editor who's been working with the poet will give a short introduction to the writer, then each poet will read for about 15 minutes or so, Clementine, then Laboni, then Fahad, and then I'll invite finally each poet to read just one more poem at the end before we wrap up, hopefully around 8 o'clock. So just to say a few words about the Poetry Centre, Oxford Brookes Poetry Centre is here based at Oxford Brookes University and is a home for research, teaching and public projects about poetry. So we run an international poetry competition, we have exhibitions, workshops and that kind of thing, a lot of stuff in the local Oxford and Oxfordshire community. And I'll put a few more details about the Poetry Centre in the chat in a bit. The press itself was established by the Centre in 2017 with the aim of being a press with an international outlook, which publishes original, arresting poetry from emerging poets. We've now published, actually, and I was quite surprised to learn, we've published 22 pamphlets, 4 of which have been selected as Poetry Book Society pamphlet choices here in the UK. One was shortlisted for the national competition, the Michael Marks Award for Poetry. And in 2021, the press itself won the Michael Marks Publishers Award. So you can find all the pamphlets that the press has published, remain in print anyway, via Oxford Brookes' online shop, and I'll put a link in the chat to that. And of course, you can find these 3 new pamphlets, which are for sale in the shop and on our pamphlets page on our website as well. I want to just briefly thank several people who made the pamphlets and the launch possible. So huge thanks to Flora Hands at Carline Creative, who designs the covers that you can see on the screen. And also to Luke Allen of Studio Lamont, who is a fantastic typesetter and also an excellent poet. And finally, I just want to say a big thanks to my fellow editors who have worked on this set of pamphlets, Claire Cox, who you're going to hear from in a moment, Les Robinson, who's our managing editor, and Tolu Agbelusi. We've been very fortunate over the last year to be joined by Tolu, who is a poet, playwright, producer, and an educator. She joined us actually as an editorial mentee in a scheme we were able to fund through the money that the press received as part of our winning that Michael Marks Award in 2021. Tolu's been working very closely with Fahad on his pamphlet, and we'll introduce him. And even though she was technically a mentee, actually, we've learned a huge amount from working with her. So many thanks indeed, Tolu. We've really appreciated this year's work. And many congratulations to the poets. It's been a real joy and a great privilege to work with you and to publish your poetry. And thank you for entrusting us with it. I hope everybody really enjoys the readings, and thank you again so much to all of you for joining us. It really makes, even though it's online, it really makes a kind of vibrant community when we do these kind of online events. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Claire, who is going to introduce Clementine for her reading. So Claire, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Neil, and welcome everybody. I just saw that Stu was feeling curious and open. I think what a way to start. Let's continue with that one. I'm curious and open, and part of that openness led me to this amazing time I had with Clementine, working on her just beautiful, beautiful poetry that chimed so beautifully with me. It ticks, it rocks, it's let's talk about radical pairings to begin with. So the title, I think, reflects Clementine's interest in the kind of quantum mechanics, quantum entanglement, that weird space where we can inhabit time and space across different areas, where we can be simultaneously in places, and I think that really underpins and makes very cohesive this pamphlet that is possibly about migration largely, but not necessarily about who migrates. Very interested in how we migrate. And I think the important thing here is that the we that Clementine brings to us through this amazing collection is a very broad and very generous we. There's humans, there's non-humans, there's objects, there's pearls, there's loved ones. They all inhabit this amazing space that she's created that crosses all those different facets of a kind of sense of a keening grief, but also amazingly alive with possibilities. That's the bit that I think really hooked me into this amazing collection and was such a joy of working with Clementine. What else do you need to know? I learnt a great deal. I think we both kind of clicked the moment we realized we quite like poetry that maybe puts up a little bit of a struggle, a little bit of resistance to an easy reading. So we were kind of very keen to make sure that none of the treasures were kind of revealed first time. There's layers and layers and layers and layers in this amazingly poised collection, which I'll stop talking about because I'm very excited and I'd love to hear Clementine read her work, if that's possible. Clementine, are you up for that?
Absolutely, Claire. Thank you very much for that very generous introduction, and indeed for your guidance throughout the whole process. And one of the things I wanted to say is I'm in a really very special situation because I'm online, but I'm in a room and I'm surrounded by friends and colleagues who are watching me and waiting for me. So I feel very privileged, really. So I am going to start by reading Urvögel, the very first bird, and the dedication is for Kuva Likenyi. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about the context for that. Now, Kuva Likenyi is a local leader from the active volcano that I come from in Cameroon. And he ran into the very first German colonial troops around it was the 1840s, 1850s, around about that time period. And he came off very, very well against them. He's remembered in that area because of this. And his descendants are actually still local leaders in the very same area today. So that's a little bit the background for it. This was in the context of the German colonial incursion with their troops into Africa. I'd like to think my line began with a song. Elongi, Yemusungedi. In distant memory, perhaps a bugle sounds before the charge across an ancient bridge and a disorderly retreat. Perhaps a dog laps von Gravenhäut's blood, and the martyrs walk back to their farms. No one's hanged. No one's forced onto rock from fertile earth. I'd like to think someone drenches the soil with palm wine. I'd like to think of a choir and Elongi Yemusungeri in contralto voice. The next poem I'd like to read is called Portrait of an Unnamed African Girl, and it was painted in 1682. And the context for that, which I'm not going to go too deeply into, is again, someone who is faced with a particular moment that turns out to be significant. And that became significant for me when I was writing about it. I've put on a ribbon tie choker and 4 best green satin to crouch beside the Duchess of Portsmouth. She's Louise de Keroualle. The painter's called Pierre Mignard. The scarlet coral I hold sets off the Duchess's gemstones and her blue damask sleeve. Her rich cascade of curls contrasts with my shaven head. My corner of the canvas is lost to shadow. The artist paints even my fingernails deep brown. Gloom lifts around the Duchess. I know my own name. I've held this smile for so long that my teeth feel dry. Her look's neutral. My work's to rest a tender gaze on Louise de Keroualle's face. Hers is to sit still on a golden stool. Pierre Mignard places the Duchess's hand on my back. My neck's locked. Her leg muscles twitch. The next poem I'm going to read is called My Cousin After Many Rounds of Chemotherapy. She says having cancer is like a full-time job. She's always paid her taxes, claimed no benefits, committed no felonies, studied for degrees. On the phone, she recites her 4 different types of drugs, 2 mastectomies, and 27 lymph nodes. She can't leave her country, and I can't leave mine. We approach each other in each call, although it's her pick line, her Uber rides, and her amazing nurses. She shares her jokes, her MRI team selfies, her clinical trial, her drug-induced headache, the morning she spent in the garden, gorging herself on early sun, and later she shares her hospital awards. It's her 3-hour Muzak playlist on the phone to immigration. Her shoulders heaving, her wry face, her laughter at the news. She need not concern herself. her leave to remain can be awarded posthumously. I have a little context about the next poem, which is called Berber for Water. It's dedicated to Ndeye Mariame Sarr, who is a Black African woman from Gambia who was shot by the police in Germany while she was having a mental health crisis in the post office or unemployment office where she had gone to collect a benefit to which she was entitled. You can see Africa from the high Al-Pujara, they say. Go now. Here is Al-Busarat, suspended on the southern edge of the Sierra Nevada. Pack cucumbers, sheep's milk, cheese, and a conference pair. From the winding road, look for the glint of 1,000 polytunnels. Here was Zereshk. Here was Sumak. Go further, for there nothing grows. Walk to where the call to prayer echoed through the woods. Slow, where trees hesitate. Stone grooves yawned here. This way lies a dried up sluice. Snow melt spills swift without a network of levees buried to ward off droughts. Here is the last tree greening at the heart of a hollowed out coppice. Here is the last meal. All the way underfoot are silted up veins. Everywhere, absence dwells. Wolf. Though our ancestors hunted her kind through highland rainforests 10,000 years ago, though nettles grow up over hill scars, through a stand-up dock, she watches, curious. Boys lay a perimeter of piss around a canvas tent. Triangled ears turn to the sounds of their small, safe deaths, their tenderness. A wolf is spotted aboard a train in Brussels. In pubs on the Polish-German border, instead of musk deer, staghorn ferns are nailed to wooden trophy boards. She leaves a boggy stink in stairwells near Glasgow Green. The treads never wash clean of her. Watchfires linger after 3 pregnant wolves are shot on the way to France. Near the Forest of Dean, a dog walker raises the alarm. When night blots out the purple of Pennyroyal, the search for wolves is abandoned. Among brambles so thick, a pizza box is a smudge in their surveillance footage. The DNA profile captured in her scat is tagged lone female. She leaves a paw print between the day lilies. The shadow of an overhead power line marks her flank. And I'm going to end with a poem called Matryoshka, which means Russian dolls. When a mother's body unzips, there's a parliament inside where great-grandmothers and grandmothers convene. A child can take its mother home. They say to live in a body is to submit to its laws. Great-grandmothers and grandmothers convene. A mother pinches the wound shut, they say. To live in a body is to submit to its laws. Don't pray for children when you only want a daughter or a son. A mother pinches the wound shut. A mother's body is a hometown. They say don't pray for children when you only want a daughter or a son. Don't pass on the last names of men. A mother's body is a hometown where Bible bashers and palm wine drinkers walk the streets. When a mother's body unzips, there's a parliament inside. They say a child takes its mother home. That was it for me. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Clementine. That was really compelling reading, and such beautiful and really powerful images in there. Thank you so much. Really wonderful way to begin our event this evening. I'm going to be introducing Laboni now. I've been working with Laboni on her pamphlet, and from beginning to end, it was joy working with Laboni on this work. She always had really clear ideas about the kinds of themes she wanted to explore in the collection and which poems might be included. But we also had lots of very detailed discussions about individual words, lines, and indeed sometimes marks of punctuation, which is the kind of exciting editing I like to do. Which comma should we use? Should we use a comma at all? Those kinds of things. What is a colon? What is a semicolon? What is it work? How does it work in poetry? Laboni is acutely attentive to detail, and that means that these poems, as you'll see, are really layered with lots of different meanings. They repay rereading, and they say multiple things at once. Laboni has a truly generous and moving commitment to the kinds of stories that she feels need to be told and feels compelled to tell. And so this often seems like a pamphlet by a storyteller, which is a role that Laboni has inherited from the women in her family, especially her mother. At the same time, you'll also encounter some very beautiful, memorable single images in these poems that really glow like the hurricane lamps that feature so prominently later in the pamphlet. Some of the experiences described or hinted at here, whether they're historical, personal, or environmental, are difficult, sometimes quite painful ones. But the pamphlet is also very playful, it's optimistic, and it is uplifting. I am sure you're going to really enjoy hearing this sample that Laboni is going to give us. So Laboni, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neil. It's been a joy to work with you over all of these months. Hi, everybody. I will be sharing 5 poems. And before reading each poem, I will do my best to describe the poem's appearance on the page. The first poem is the opening poem of the pamphlet, and it goes down the length of the page. It has stanzas and lines of varying length. There is some dialogue. The dialogue is indented as well as italicized. And this poem is inspired by a story that my grandmother told my mother, and my mother told my sister and me. Salt. for my maternal grandmother, Nurun Nahar, who started the story. Bangladesh. These days, the sea adds salt to everything. But I remember when my father gathered us daughters. He was an old king whose body curved into a question. How do you love me? The way he asked us, so Shakespearean. Like sugar, said my sisters, their voices swaying like the sweet cane. This pleased the old king, who turned to me. Like salt, said I, seawater evaporating from my tongue, my voice crystalline. I knew my father's moods by the way they made landfall. Like salt. Like salt! I scrambled inside myself to survive the cyclone. My silence, a suitable shelter. With the cooks I spoke, negotiating the evening meal. They took salt out of the dal, the bhat, the bhaji, the aloo, the mach, the korma, the chutney. My father learned salt's worth by its absence. But these days, the sea adds salt to everything. Mangroves standing sentry at the coastline know the sea is moving inland, salting the fields so rice stops growing, salting the wells so water is undrinkable. I would take salt out of the wells, the fields, and if the old king asked again, how do you love me? I would say, my love is a complicated country, barely above sea level. The second poem has a scattered appearance on the page, as though the stanzas have been tossed. The first stanza aligns with the right-hand margin, while the second stanza is centered. The third stanza aligns with the left-hand margin, and so on and so forth, and with no particular pattern. There is a little bit of extra space between the lines of the poem. And this poem was inspired by a girl made of shells. Maybe some of you in the audience will know these girls made of shells. And this particular girl made of shells was brought back from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Girl made of shells. Like flood tide, my mother returns from the Bay of Bengal and brings me a girl made of shells. She is a figure of flutes and whorls who carries the sound of the sea. Every shell built by a soft animal that wore its toughness on the outside. Her feet coquinas, her body moonshell and olive, her arms small augers, and her face is a cowrie that camouflaged to survive life in the reef. I hold the girl made of shells in my hand like an inheritance. Two brows form a black gull flying, over her eyes dark coasts. Only a trace of a mouth. It is easier to write about a girl made of shells than to write about being a girl. As a cowrie, her face has a history as currency. Light and portable and marriageable, or made into jewelry to adorn. My grandmother taught my mother, and my mother taught my sister and me, a game we are playing together across time. I toss 4 cowries into a ring. If they all land with their mouths closed, I earn 1 point apiece. mouths open, double, for each one I grab before others do. 3 alike, a missed turn. 2 alike, I flick shells with open mouths against closed. See how the calories glance off each other? See how we cast our faces into the game. This third poem is going to take us to a different environment. On the page, it appears as a block or a square or square-ish. The lines are force justified, and I will do my best to make the line break audible. Lunar eclipse. I audition for the part of the moon, airless, become a surface unlivable, over 4 billion years young, with a white-hot ball bearing of a heart. My situation is concentric. Life's a lit elliptical, I spin, spin, and orbit Earth, which spins, and orbits the sun's swift furnace. Effort returns me to my starting place. La 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 la. I have mixed feelings about gravity. On one hand, it keeps me here. On the other hand, it keeps me here. Everyone's familiar with my phases, but forgetful of my seas. Oh, my Maria, named cleverness, named serenity, named crises, named fertility. Earth casts a shadow which I enter involuntarily. Penumbra, umbra. Why is everyone's interest in me greatest when I am disappearing? This fourth poem is centered on the page. It is long and narrow, or it might be better for me to say it is deep and narrow, like a well. The poem is set in Rajshahi, and for context, Rajshahi is near the border between India and what is now Bangladesh. But in the world, the story world of this poem, it was at the time East Pakistan. The well. Rajshahi, East Pakistan, circa 1958. The cat had fallen in again. Pale brown paws slipping from the well's circumference. 4 guava trees stood by. Thin-limbed, a child ran, and her voice flew from the roost of her throat. She called for Khalil, who was from Noakhali, but lived on the other side of the wall in a Hindu family's once home. They shared the well in the wall, 2 ropes, 2 pails, and a metal partition. The cat was mewling. Khalil fed a rope through his hands, and the child's voice lowered like the pail into which the cat clambered. A slow haul. The cat shook dry its body, and the day was ruffled as the frock the child smoothed down. Khalil and the child stood on opposite sides of a divided well, but the water drawn was the same. The child would become my mother. This was after partition, before the Liberation War, not far from a stream that split from a river and changed its name. In 1971, East Pakistan became Bangladesh, and this poem is the poem from which the pamphlet takes its title. The first part of the poem is recalling the past, and this part of the poem is indented. Partway through the poem, we fast forward in time, and when we reach that part, that stanza aligns with the left-hand margin. And at the very end of the poem, the stanza or stanzas split up, and there are single lines that move across the page towards the edges. Hurricanes. Dhaka, East Pakistan, March 1971. That is what my mother called the lanterns, one in every room. Kerosene already funneled into their metal founts. Her father had taught her how to light one, to wait for oil rising, through the burner's cotton wick, like courage, through a body, to raise the globe of glass, carry a match, its small head on fire. He would not live to see the Civil War, the patrolling army, and nightly curfews. My mother, a soft syllable stepping out of the living room, its 4 windows curtained. On the wall, my grandmother's painting of choka, shell ducks with bright bodies disappearing in the dark interior. They lit one lantern. Years later, she's still grasping the bale, holding history like a hurricane whose wick she trims and trims. A war of liberation. 2 winds swirling over water. When the storm spirals home, she stays upright, lit. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Laboni. Thank you so much. That was a really moving reading. As I said in my introduction, I think so many of those poems repay reading and rereading. So just like all these pamphlets, I hope that you'll seek them out. I'm just going to put a link there in the chat, so you can find our page on the website where you'll find interviews with the poets who explain a little bit more about their thinking behind the poems and the pamphlets, and also you can track down the pamphlets themselves and buy them, and we will send them out to you. So we're going to conclude. Don't forget there's going to be 3 extra little poems at the end, but this third section is devoted to Fahad's pamphlet, and to introduce him I'm going to ask Tolu to step in, who's been working with him really closely, and together they produced this really compelling pamphlet. So Tolu, would you mind introducing Fahad? Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening. It was a joy to work with Fahad on this pamphlet. He wasn't scared to be challenged and to push himself, to chisel the work to become what it needed to be, and to ask the questions that he may not have considered before. And I love working with poets who love questions. And something that is always important to do, I find, is to write the absences into being, because even through the fiction of poetry, what we're doing is writing a history. And Fahad does that here, not only with regards to the series of fictive letters for Al-Amoudi, who I may have sung, but also the stories of the main protagonist, who is seeking the silent moments, the moments that happen upon us when we're growing up. And both of them feed into each other, so that even in the poems that are not part of the series, you can see a synergy that is being created. And Fahad has a beautiful way, and I've said this to him, even though I'm not sure he believes me. He has a beautiful way with language, and there's a way that it surprises you, not just in the stories, but with the tenderness, the way that Fahad approaches the stories, the characters, which I'm supposing must be a reflection of you, Fahad. And I've enjoyed reading and working on this collection. And if you haven't bought it yet, now is your reminder to buy it now as we're speaking. And with no further ado, I would invite Fahad to read some of this poem.
Thank you so much, Tolu. That was a beautiful introduction. It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure working with you. And although I was like hesitant and awkward at first in answering those difficult questions, we got there in the end, and it was a really beautiful process. Thank you. It's a really privilege. It's a massive privilege as well to read alongside Laboni and Clementine. Really, really happy that you both read Lunar Eclipse and Berber for Water, because those are two of my favorite poems from your respective pamphlets. So it was a pleasure to hear you read those. Yeah, so I'm going to read a few poems, but before we get to that, there's like a little bit of housekeeping context for some of the work. As Tolu mentioned, there's a suite or a sequence of poems that runs through the pamphlet that are written from the perspective of a person from history, specifically an Ethiopian prince who ends up living here in the UK. And this is kind of the context of him being here and the context of me writing about him. So I'm just going to briefly read the note on the text, and that will kind of put into context some of the work. Note on the text. In 1867, the British government sent a military expedition force to Ethiopia to retrieve envoys who had been imprisoned by Emperor Theodros II after a breakdown in diplomatic communication. At the Battle of Magdala in 1868, the Ethiopians lost and the emperor killed himself. The British expedition force, containing a few private collectors and one British museum curator, looted the fort of Magdala and surrounding settlements, setting them on fire. A few weeks after the battle, the Empress Tiruwa died of a respiratory illness. General Napier and Captain Speedy decided to take her only son back to the UK against her dying wishes, where he lived and studied until he died of pleurisy in Leeds at the age of 18. The Foreign Office forbade the prince from communicating with any members of his family or ever returning to his home in Ethiopia, fearing he might become a threat to British imperialist interests in the Horn of Africa. The prince's name was Alamayu. The sequence that runs through this pamphlet are fictional letters he might have written. So that just provides the context for the sequence, for which the first poem, which is actually the first poem in the pamphlet, I will read now. Cicada. I can't see water, but I can taste salt in the wind. It is morning. There is only one season here, and it is the rainy one. Clouds rub against each other like cicadas. You can even see where they meet and run your finger along the edge of their precipice. The light is dull. It falls through the gap as syrup. These hills are nothing like the ones back home, where your breath drops over the ledge. I miss that feeling of your spine filing against the sun, when you are so high that your gut is a Masenko string. This island is one grain of rock salt slowly dissolving in the water. Ayat, everything is bitter. Sea foams on the lips of the cliff face. People here talk with a swell in their throats, talk of more rain, that impenetrable curtain. I remember all the stories you told me. Deep water ports on a bed of far-off coins. Sailors at Massawa, their skin black and pearlescent. Boats made of ash and boats made of iron. Eyes red from coal dust and all that leaving. Thanks. So moving on, the next poem I'm going to read is the poem that follows on from Cicada, and it is not written from the perspective of Alamayu, but this is kind of the contemporary speaker coming in, and it's very much kind of a pair of poems that kind of speak to each other, Cicada and then Amateur Birdcatcher. And I was really interested in exploring this idea of the kind of diasporic figure returning home, and parallels with kind of, like being a colonizer almost. The way kind of landscape and people are shrunken into symbols, and the way experience is kind of essentialized. And that was really what I wanted to explore. This is Amateur Bugcatcher. The road to Managasha is a short one. Spinos. I know it like Braille, or the Morse code of bumps in the belly of Mum's sun-bleached Jeep. Back then, I'd flip open my Game Boy, listen for the finicky language of traffic lights. My ears are butterfly nets. Nothing sticks. Walking up this road, young boys look at me as if recognizing a dead explorer. They stamp as though trampling insects, open their hands like this place is a mistranslation of flower, glistening where the tall trees cluster in pairs, each with a fletching of leaves knocking against the sky. I have breathed the same rain-shelled air, climbed the same crumbed hills, sat at aunties' tables, ruffled by long leaves, and watched coffee beans crackle over a naked flame. Pulled a smile, small as a toothpick, waved at the same women selling wicker baskets. Elbows bent like palm trunks, they greet me for the first time. I wonder what I must look like to them, my mouth agape. So yeah, a lot of what the pamphlet is kind of these poems as ghost stories, people speaking back into the archive, speaking back into history. That's kind of a poem that kind of starts that in that spirit, and it's a theme that continues further on. This next one is a poem about kind of, parental relationships, using the myth of Daedalus and Icarus, though not the escape from the Minotaur, a further one down the line, specifically the death of Daedalus, if anyone's familiar with that one. Not much intro to this one, actually. I'll just read it. You don't have to like me, Baba. I'm just a story. Something you come across and decide to let in. As a child, I had a book of myths. The cover was Aegean green, the color of my mother's garden. I ran between the lilies and orchids, flying a model plane, its wing splitting open the clouds like a stone from within. Not noticing in the background, Icarus falling, taking with him the sun, small as a seed dropped into the soil. It's April, and I have nowhere to be. Vines climb burglar bars. You sift through the loam for coins, a snake at your ankle, waiting. My eyes now fixed on a point in the sky. Thank you. The next one is a poem inspired by a particular song called Bedtime by Billy Woods, from the album Hiding Places, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. A lot of this pamphlet was written listening to Hiding Places and one of his other albums, Ethiops. He's a really wonderful writer who I take inspiration from a lot. And his song, I guess, is predominantly about domestic violence. And in one of the verses, he imagines a world without adults. Children kind of lose their inhibition. There's no kind of shame. There's no capitalism. But my kind of response to his song plays on this idea of playfulness in the face of kind of decay and trauma and loss. So that's kind of the spirit of the poem and the inspiration behind it. Bedtime, after Billy Woods. I put my finger to the wind and don't get it back. Low light snatches me from the front step. The courtyard dervishes with my feet, thinking of that empty house as the shadows stretched. Fists punch up through the ground, scatter milk teeth, bloom into hyenas. There are no rules in these hours. This is where magic lives, the blue and green, where time shrugs like a sieve. All the other houses yawn in their sleep. I am delirious, howl my name at the trees, wait for someone to claim it. I steal flickers from the street lamp, play keepy-ups on the second hand of a watch, a wheeze of grass blades. Ain't no bedtime, mama. The city sleeps damp on a blotted paper sky, Kirby pink. Everyone is a parapet. I am the only one awake. I move from one house to another like a hammer throw, smack drool out the dogs. The barking follows. Grapes wither on my tongue. Fruit flies rub their hands. Stone eyelids. Alarms rattle through the compound. I listen for an echo. My name hasn't come back yet. Thanks. And I'm going to end on a poem called Cinnabar Island. And this is the third to last poem in the pamphlet, but it's the one that I consider to kind of end the book. And then the two poems that come after that are kind of like an epilogue or like a postscript kind of thing. So this is partly inspired by a location in the video game, but that's not really necessary to kind of engage with the poem. But just thought I'd mention that. Thanks everyone for coming out. This is my final poem. Cinnabar Island. Who says no man is an island is himself an archipelago, whose waters are so green they hide within themselves, like a thief or disgraced god, the secret fire. Here the volcano curdles a burlap sack of hearts. Here the dead and resurrected crowd underneath terracotta roofs like soldiers beneath helmets. An abandoned house erupts from the hill by the western shore. Stones scavenge what moss they can. A sign, English broken as the windows, says, "No stealers." How much more is there to mine from a thing as ordinary as disaster? Devotion is its own kind of vanity. I see the ocean has broken into laughter. Island is having one of his tantrums again, the wind asides. The joke being, the volcano is long extinct until it isn't. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Fahad. Thank you so much. And again, if you haven't read the pamphlet yet, that interaction between the two real sort of main speakers, Alamayo, Prince Alamayo, and the speaker of the other poems is so integrated. It's so beautifully done. So look out for the structure when you get hold of the pamphlet. So we're going to conclude with one poem from each poet now. And I'll put a link again in the chat if you'd like to follow up any of these pamphlets or all of these pamphlets. They are £6 each, to let you know, but you can buy all three, or indeed any three of our pamphlets for £13, which indeed anywhere is a bargain. So I'm going to hand you over now to Clementine. Clementine, would you mind reading your final extra poem? Thank you very much.
Thank you. This poem is called Thaw. Inside, 100 doors fly open. Inside me, generations pocket one-way tickets, ride in caravans, stride across tundra, step off trains, scramble across barricades. Their small boats greet the tide. Roots spread. The origin of many British plants is uncertain. At 8 in the evening, hoofbeats take the road, and the traffic in Glen Etive shrinks back. Bridges are penstrokes through mist, glassy lochs, grey call of nighttime heron. The riot of packing, unpacking, cities changing. For years, I have kissed snakes, scaled ladders, fumbled over place settings. The interview panels are always white. People and cars go back and forth. In the end, islands dissolve.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Clementine. That was terrific. And Laboni.
This is a small poem with lines of medium length. Projapoti, or butterfly in my tongue. Grandmother, one fluttered over a potted plant inside your home. By the grill, the wall that was not wall but half window, creatures flying in and out as they please, the way all traffic flows in Bengal. Wings wider than my 7-year-old palms, iridescent opal and green. Grandmother, you bore a birthmark like a butterfly, symmetrical across your spine. As you bent, embroidered my initials into the corner of a kerchief. A hidden part of you shimmered, was fluttering. I wanted Projapoti to land on a leaf and stay. It flew through the grill, my very first and last sighting.
That was wonderful, Laboni. Thank you. Beautifully read. And finally, back to Fahad.
This poem, I have to thank Tolu for asking me the question of what might Alamayu feel if he met someone that he fell in love with while he was here in England. And this is the poem that came from that question. Unsent, circa 1878. We met in the spring. The world opened like a pistachio. You were everything I wasn't expecting to find. A wish at the end of the dandelion sea. You said I was a library, quiet and sun-spotted, a leopard sleeping in a tree. That was the year I read Byron and Shelley, not much else. It's easy to mistake longing for love, that parasol affair. My shadow is irredentist. I stay by the creek, the water imperceptibly deep. This, I tell myself, is easy, a spectator to my own desire. With you, I speak with closed lips, for fear I might swallow a flood.
That was fantastic. All three poets, really huge thanks. Really compelling readings, and these are wonderful pamphlets, folks. I really recommend. I mean, I would say that, but I really recommend you check them out. Find our website. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about the press or any questions for the poets. I'm sure I'd be able to pass them on. Thank you so much to the poets, and thank you to all of you for coming along this evening. It's been wonderful to share this time with you. Have a very good afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, rest of your day, and thanks so much again for joining us. Take care.